Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers. Come on, me in it and join in the fun. Travel all over Australia.
There's a lot of talk these days about recycling of waste material. Well, here at Heathmont in Victoria, we meet a man and his wife who turn old paper into new paper. Then we go down to Zeehan here on the west coast of Tasmania to have a look at the mining of Crocolite. Then across to New Zealand to the North Island to have a look at Mount Tarawera, the site of New Zealand's greatest eruption.
Have you ever considered writing a letter to ask the Leyland brothers with a suggestion for a story on our program? Well, if you have, maybe you'd like to use some of this paper. It's unusually handmade, and in fact the handcraft, the new craft of making paper by hand was brought to our attention by Mr. Arthur Burrows from Burwood in Victoria. He wrote and suggested that the craft of making paper by hand the way it was made centuries ago by Sonia and Kees van Bodegraven here at Heathmont might make an interesting story for our program. So we're going to meet the Bodegravens now and find out how they go about it.
Paper making dates back 1800 years when a Chinaman named Cai Lung invented paper. Since then, it has grown into an industry providing the world's largest everyday commodity, and also the world's largest waste maker. And it's from this waste that Kees van Bodegraven produces his handmade paper in the paper mill in his backyard.
First we mainly sort out the different types of paper, and later on we start out sorting out the colors. So although it looks white, those envelopes, some are green, some are grey, and some have a blue inside. So that will give us later on the color we may be after.
The texture and colour of the finished paper is determined by the raw materials, which, when sorted, are immersed in water for about 20 minutes. The soggy paper is then beat into a pulp. Kees uses an old washing machine with a cutting blade fitted in place of an agitator. This liquid pulp is added to a bulk supply in a large tank, and it's from here that the paper is made. The solution must be kept agitated, and on a large tank like this, Kees has a propeller to keep the fibres in suspension. The paper is made using two pieces of equipment known as a mould and decal. The mould is a fine mesh screen which allows the water to run through, but the fibres of paper to remain. The decal is the frame which produces the edge of the paper. It's important to shake the mould while the water drains to interlock the fibres and make the paper stronger. The sheet of paper is now couched. This is the correct term for pressing it gently onto a cloth and easing the mould away to leave the paper. This way several papers are stacked one on top of each other, each sheet separated by a sheet of felt material. It's important that the felt material is of animal fibre, so it won't adhere to the paper. To produce a watermark, a thin piece of copper wire is sewn onto the mesh of the mould, and when the paper is pressed out, it leaves an impression of slightly thinner paper. When a large enough pile of paper is ready, it must be pressed under high pressure to squeeze out all the water. Kay's has made up a large heavy-duty press for handling big quantities. The pressing will take about an hour. Sonia, Kay's wife, also makes paper, but she uses it as an art form by placing various objects and colouring onto the surface of the paper and bonding it together with additional pulp.
Designs comes in at first, and then it is a matter of finishing it off. It's very hard to explain. How do you explain painting a picture?
When the paper is ready to be removed from the press, it is still very delicate and must be handled with care. Each sheet is hung to dry naturally at room temperatures.
I'd like you to show the watermark as we have seen it on the mold.
If a textured finish is required, the paper is sandwiched with a hard textured material, in this case a sheet of aluminium, and forced through a strong set of rollers. The result is quite distinctive.
This could be a visitor's book.
Sonia shows Lorraine the great variety of colours and textures in the finished products.
With an Australian theme, this gum nuts, like you saw me putting the faces in the paper mill. This time it is gum nuts, all part of the paper. And this one is what they call the snuffed snakeskin. This one, Heathmont pods. Yes. Those have designs in them, still using raw fibers.
Some of the most striking cards and envelopes are these in which Sonia has embedded natural things like gum leaves. This unusual painting by Sonia embodies a choco vine. It even includes a dried out choco. Another practical use for Sonia's unusual artistic talent is to produce decorative lampshades.
Well, what you can do with handmade paper is about as limited as your imagination. And if you fancy doing it yourself, well, you can buy one of these do-it-yourself kits, which is produced by the Van Bodegradens. It includes everything you'd need for doing it at home. You have a little whipping gadget which goes onto an electric drill for mashing up the paper pulp. There's a mould and decal. In fact, there are two decals. This one here is for making envelopes and that one for pieces of paper, so you can produce your own personalised stationery. There's a press, which you put the paper in for squeezing it, and plenty of these cloths for laying the paper between. And of course, there's a set of instructions which tells you precisely how to go about it at home.
Kays was a printer by trade and started making his own paper because of the limited range of paper types available in the industry. Now he seems to have started a new home craft. But of course, all paper is intended to either be written on or printed on. And here, I'll let Kays von Bodegraven have the last word.
Well, what do you think of that?
Have you heard of Crocolite? It sounds like an animal, doesn't it? But actually it's a mineral. And to find it, we've had to come to Zeehan here in the wet southwest coast of Tasmania. We've come at the suggestion of Peter Favini of Mount Isa in Queensland. Peter wrote to say, as an experienced rock collector, I have travelled with my family all over Australia, but I've not had the chance to see the famous Crocolite mine in Tasmania. I would like to see how the Crocolite is extracted from the ground and what it is used for. I hope this will prove most interesting. Well, Peter, let's go and have a look at some Crocolite. The old School of Mines and Metallurgy in Zeehan's main street is now the West Coast Pioneers Museum. Among its many displays is a section of mining and geological specimens. The specimens include Crocolite, a very rare mineral that is orange to red in colour and usually occurs as long prismatic crystals which are frequently hollow. Crocolite is actually lead chromate. It is formed by chromium-bearing solutions reacting with lead minerals. It is very fragile and will break into powder if handled. It was first discovered near Zeehan in 1895. A mining town called Dundas sprang up, and the Crocolite was sent to Zeehan by narrow gauge railway for use as a flux at the Zeehan smelter. In 1913, the Zeehan smelter closed down, and the Crocolite mines were considered worked out as well. Only one Crocolite mine is still operated. We follow the mine's owner into the rugged wet country around Dundas. Frank Mihailovich has owned the Adelaide Crocolite mine for 5 years. A geologist friend of Frank's, Phil Jones, is along to help. The Adelaide's main shaft is 90 metres deep.
Watch out for what's below.
In its heyday, the Adelaide mine produced vast quantities of high-grade Crocolite and employed 40 men. Today it's very quiet indeed. The government geologist said in 1925, the Adelaide mine is almost mined out and finds of high-quality Crocolite are very rare indeed. This hasn't deterred Frank. He first got Crocolite fever 23 years ago and has been digging for it ever since. It's very hard to find any now, and when it is found it is so fragile it takes hours to extract a tiny piece for fear of breaking it. Crocolite is no longer used commercially, and the specimens Frank is searching for are sold to mineral collectors all over the world as exhibition specimens.
This is some of it we found this morning, which is not very good, but we have found a lot better. The structure of it is basically lead. It forms in some very nice crystals when it gets in quality.
Back at his caravan park, Frank shows us his precious collection of Crocolite. It's worth a lot of money, so he keeps the specimens in a safe.
This is one of the best there is, and that's the one took 3 days to get out. A lot of painful work. 3.5 hours to drive 7 miles to bring him in.
Frank uses chisels and light equipment to extract these sort of specimens from the surrounding rock. These pieces are the best Frank has ever found. He has sold the biggest ones to a collector in the United States, and to ensure their safe delivery, he intends to wrap them in cotton wool and carry them by hand aboard a jet to America and hand them over to the collector personally. Some poor quality Crocolite is also found in Russia, but the world's best Crocolite specimens have come from Zeehan in Tasmania. We're at Rotorua in New Zealand. We've come to Rotorua to answer a request from Lorna Neverson of Wollongong in New South Wales. Lorna wrote and said, if you choose to visit New Zealand, one example that would prove an interesting topic would be Tarawera's crater in the Rotorua district. Tarawera Mountain was the site of New Zealand's greatest volcanic eruption. Well, Lorna, we're going to go to the top of Mount Tarawera with Brian Cummings on a 4-wheel drive safari. Brian advertises this trip as come with us and stand on the brink of hell. Driving through this peaceful countryside in bright sunshine, it is difficult to imagine the brink of hell being our destination. Brian Cummings is an excellent guide and keeps everyone entertained with stories of the history of the area we're travelling through. Soon we sight Mount Tarawera, brooding sullenly above the quiet countryside. Tarawera was thought to be extinct until June 10, 1886, when without warning it erupted violently. The steep track up Mount Tarawera itself is only suitable for 4-wheel drive vehicles. As we near the summit, the lush vegetation gives way to an almost barren landscape. An eerie fog envelops us, adding to the sense of desolation. The first sight of the mighty fissure on top of Mount Tarawera is breathtaking. It makes you feel ant-like by its gigantic proportions. The pink and orange colours are the remaining ash-like substance called scoria. The whole mountain top is loose ash and powder. Brian Cummings explained to us about the eruption in 1886.
The people at the village at Tiwaro, they were awoken in the early hours of the morning. About 1 o'clock, 1:30 a.m. it commenced, with violent earth tremors, terrible trembling and rumbling of the earth. And on getting up to investigate, it could be seen that a dark vapour column was being ejected from the northern peak of the mountain, a peak called Wahanga, which strange enough is the Maori name for bursting open. And a short time later, a further dark vapour column was seen being ejected from the centre of the mountain. And not long after that, the whole mountain just split open. And that was what was so unusual about the eruption, in that a normal volcano builds up to a cone-shaped peak, like our own Ngarahoe and Edgecombe and Heathmont. This mountain didn't, such as you'll see today. It literally split open from one end right through to the other. And by about 2 o'clock, 2 a.m, rocks were beginning to fall on the village. And then at 3:30 a.m, it was a gigantic explosion, prolonged roar, and then mud began to fall heavily and bury the village, scalding hot mud. And it was assessed next morning that gigantic explosion that occurred at 3:30 was when the mountain split down the southwestern end, down into Lake Rotomahana, and it completely blew the lake completely out. That's mainly where all the mud came from that actually buried the village, was from the Rotomahana part of the craters. It also blew a rift 3 miles southwest of the lake, and that's the thermal valley of Waimungu. And so that at the height of the eruption, from Waimungu right through to the northern peak of the mountain, there was just a straight line of 10 miles of country, belching out red-hot incandescent rocks, mud, smoke and ash.
This is the bottom of the gigantic volcanic rift. The explosion that caused this huge 10-kilometre rift was heard in Auckland, 300 kilometres away. The explosion destroyed 3 villages and killed 150 people. Tarawera was New Zealand's greatest eruption, and Brian describes this resultant crater as the most awe-inspiring scene this side of the grave. In this utter desolation, nature is striving for a foothold. Hardy mosses and a patch or two of tussocky grass are starting to grow. Steam rises from the ash after a shower of rain, creating an atmosphere that must resemble the beginning of the world's creation. You can certainly feel that you are standing on the brink of hell in Tarawera's crater. From the top of Tarawera, Lake Rotomahana can be seen. It was reshaped during the eruption, and in the distance, steam rises from the Waimungu Valley at the southern end of the rift. Pat is intrigued by the emerald pool at the bottom of the 50-metre deep killing a guide's wife and child. Earlier, in 1903, an eruption killed 3 visitors and a guide. More recently, in 1973, another explosion destroyed 100 metres of walking track around the cauldron's edge. There is an endless variety of weird, exciting and strangely beautiful thermal phenomena to be seen in the Waimungu Valley. Ramoko's Throat, or the Inferno crater as it is called, is a steaming lake of unknown depth. It sometimes overflows, with hot water pouring over its edge at a rate of thousands of litres per minute. We're at the southern end of the 15-kilometre rift caused by the eruption of Mount Tarawera. Volcanic activity ceased at Mount Tarawera, but it continues here in the Waimungu Valley. This area is still regarded as an active volcano. A fascinating area to visit on New Zealand's North Island.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers. Come on, be in it and join in the fun. Travel all over Australia. Ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland brothers.